call the March 8th, 2023 meeting of the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board to order. It is the responsibility of this board to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Can I have a roll call, Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
Mr. May?
Here.
Ms. Bowie?
Here.
Mr. Roadley?
Here. We've had an opportunity to review the minutes of the February 8th meeting. Are there any changes or additions? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve?
Approve.
There is a motion to approve the minutes from February 8th as presented. Mr. Wilson?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes.
The next item on the agenda, on my agenda, is the matters of special privilege. This is a little bit of a change in the overall agenda, but we would like to have the Soil and Water Conservation do their annual update for 2022. Thank you.
Ma'am and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Doug Hall. Along with Bob Lund, we are the two elected representatives from James City County to the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. I'd like to give you a quick update on our activities over the past year supporting James City County. And as you know, our mission is much like yours, protecting the environment, reducing sediment load and nutrient load. So with that, slide please. The districts were established in the 30s nationwide in response to the Dust Bowl. And here in Virginia, we are a political subdivision of the Commonwealth. The Colonial is one of 47 districts throughout the state, and we serve James City, York, Charles City, New Kent counties, and the city of Williamsburg with 2 elected directors per locality. About 60% of our funding comes from the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and pretty much all of that money is obligated for specific efforts. Our district and the other districts are, we like to say, all carrot and no stick. We provide matching funds to encourage people for conservation efforts, but we have no regulatory authority. The 825 square mile Colonial District is home to approximately 175,000 people and growing. And we continue our traditional agricultural efforts, but we're supplementing that more and more with suburban and urban efforts to support the local population. The local government funding and grants enable us to offer more than the Virginia DCR cost share programs can provide. Slide, please. Our traditional agricultural program comes under the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share Program, or VACS. It provides technical and financial assistance for agricultural conservation practices. And over the past 5 years, we spent over $88,000 for farmland conservation practices here in James City County. These include nutrient management plans, continuous no-till, and cover crops. In addition, we support the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, doing 5 inspections on farmland every year in coordination with James City County in support of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance here in the county. The map illustrates kind of the typical setup we have here in James City County with farmland interspersed with suburban development. Our goal pretty much with all of our programs is to prevent erosion, prevent nutrient loading, and protect the waterways. Conservation planning to address the Chesapeake Bay Act issues is an example of the technical support and training that the state of Virginia doesn't fund. Slide, please. We've been heavily involved with education programs, including Virginia Dominion's Envirothon, which is a high school age conservation and environmental competition. We sponsor a team from Jamestown High School who actually won the national championship in 2019. In addition, we sponsor usually 3 children to attend the Youth Conservation Camp at Virginia Tech, which is an outdoor learning experience. We've also helped send students to the Virginia Department of Forestry Camp. We provide technical support for local school and community gardens and classroom conservation efforts, and such as advising the Stonehouse Farm Club and the community garden at Grove. Slide, please. Since 2014, we've been the primary sponsor of the community garden, which is located between War Hill High School and the sports complex. In 2019, I'm going blind, sorry. In 2019, we received a grant from USDA, the Farm to School program, for $90,000, which helped us support and grow the community garden. The land use agreement that supports the garden is between James City County and Dominion Energy, which allows an otherwise unused green space to be put to very good use. Over 5,000 pounds of fresh produce was donated to local community members in need in the last 2 years from our community garden. I'd like to thank James City County and Dominion for the use of the land and the volunteers who put in over 14,500 volunteer hours in support of the garden. Slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, urban programs are becoming more and more important as we go from agricultural land use to suburban land use. Our main urban program is the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, or VCAP. The district provides technical advice and financial assistance to install and implement conservation practices. Since 2019, interest in VCAP has generated 109 more Colonial District site visits just in James City County, enabling additional one-on-one conservation education and technical assistance. In the last 5 years, VCAP has provided nearly $75,000 to JCC homeowners, HOAs, and community organizations, matched by over $45,000 from these entities. VCAP entails a 10-year obligation for the recipient to maintain the conservation practice and for the district to inspect it periodically. It focuses on smaller projects, usually than James City County does, and can provide complementary cost-sharing funding to other programs like the James City Clean Water Heritage Program. Our urban conservationist, who is I can't say enough good about this lady. She's wonderful. Robin Woolsey now serves on the statewide VCAP program steering committee, and she has personally influenced the program policy improvements. During the past year, these have included significant increased cost share rates and caps, making VCAP even more beneficial to our residents. I'll say we, but it's mainly Bob Lund, also serves as a non-voting member on the James City Stormwater Programs Advisory Committee, providing technical assistance when required. Slide, please. I mentioned Robin Woolsey. Turf Love is really her baby, and since 2019, the district's completed 302 certified nutrient management plans for privately owned properties and an additional 34 for county-owned properties here in James City County. Turf Love incorporates support from the James City County Williamsburg Master Gardeners and teaches homeowners how to maintain their lawns in an environmentally responsible manner. It reduces nutrient loads into the waterways, it reduces soil erosion, and actually saves the homeowner money. 3 Colonial District staff members are state certified in turf and landscape nutrient management, and we've hosted several Turf Love educational events for the public, including Super Turf Saturday and Turf University, which provided education about sustainable lawn care to over 100 attendees. We've also advertised Turf Love at the Toano Open Air Market and James City County's annual Fido Fest. Slide, please. Because we live in a fairly riparian environment, The district's recognized an increased need for technical assistance for homeowners who have their property along shorelines to better manage their property to prevent water quality degradation. Again, in partnership with the Master Gardeners, we've developed a shoreline evaluation program in which participants receive an assessment from the district staff or a Master Gardener volunteer. We identify problems, give them proposed solutions, and a final report with recommendations on where they can go to get help. It takes about a year of training to get somebody up to speed on this program. We'd like to recognize the generous donation of time by the Master Gardener Water Steward volunteers, financial support for this program from James City County, and training from the staff at VIMS. Slide, please. So in 2022, the county has given us approximately $59,000, broken out as you see on the slide. But because our programs are increasing in popularity and the demand for them is increasing, slide please, I'm sorry, Mike. In 2023, we've kind of upped our request a little over $62,000, and that increase comes from an increase in the VCAP program supporting suburban homeowners. So far this fiscal year, we've completed 71 more turf love nutrient management plans, with another 11 are currently under development, and we've done 3 turf love educational events with 2 more pending. Slide, please. Our bogey for 2024 ups the turf love program by about $2,000 a year. I want to really thank you for your support in these programs, because I know you guys have a lot of influence on the Board of Supervisors and the budget. So again, we need to work hand in glove to support conservation efforts within JCC. Slide, please. Future opportunities include supplemental funds from JCC to expand the district efforts, leveraging JCC environmental program funds. We're looking at the USDA Rural Investment to Protect Our Environment grant in conjunction with Virginia Tech, and this provides technical and financial support for small farms that don't qualify for the VAX cost share program. In addition, I believe that the shoreline evaluation program is going to take off like gangbusters, and we're probably going to need more help with that. Because of the continued success and growth of our programs, we've hired a full-time outreach specialist to let landowners, residents, and other organizations know what programs are available for help. We've also hired 2 more ag specialists, bringing our ag staff to 3 full-time staff supporting our agricultural programs. The district is kind of a unique animal, unique resource, and it has a super staff. I can't tell you how smart these kids are, especially that man right there, Jim Wallace, our district manager. He's a wealth of knowledge, and I just can't tell you how much I enjoy working with him. So if we can continue with James City County support, we're going to continue to work with our partners participating in pilot programs like the USDA RIPE grant to better serve the residents of James City. And in our efforts to secure grants and complement public money, local funds help strengthen those grant applications, which often require matching contributions. Slide, please. With that, these are the contact informations for myself and Mr. Lund, my senior mentor. Again, District Manager Jim Wallace and our urban conservationist, Robert Woolsey. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank you for your support, as well as the support of the James City County Stormwater and Service Authority. They've been great partners with us for a lot of years now. With that, I'll wrap up and open it up to questions if there are any.
Any questions for Mr. Hall? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, thank you, gentlemen and ma'am.
With that, we'll move on to public hearings. The outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. And with that, I will call CBPA 23-0005 at 247 William Barksdale.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 23-0005. Mr. Matthew Roth with Roth Environmental has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Brian Schumacher for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall located at 247 William Barksdale within the Kingsmill subdivision in the College Creek watershed. Up above, you can see the subject parcel outlined in blue and the watershed, College Creek watershed, outlined here in purple. This parcel was platted in 1985 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. Here is aerial photography of the property. Topography of the property: the backyard has a fairly steep slope down to the creek. The resource protection area as it affects this property, and the floodplain as it affects the back of this property as well. The total lot size of this property is 0.93 acres, of which 67% is located within the RPA. Existing conditions on this property include a stone wall across the backyard and a wooden landscape wall. Up above is the existing conditions, so with the 150-foot RPAs shown there. The edge of wetlands is this green line up above. The areas in green are existing impervious within the landward 50-foot RPA that are going to be either removed or replaced. And the area in blue is the existing stone wall within the seaward 50-foot RPA. Lastly is the existing timber landscape wall shown here in pink. The applicant is proposing to remove the existing stone wall and replace it with a retaining wall to combat erosion on the property. Additionally, the applicant is proposing to replace the existing deck with a raised patio. Total impacts associated with this project equate to 793 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA and 60 square feet in the seaward 50-foot RPA. Here you can see, again, the 150-foot RPA shown in red, the edge of wetlands. In yellow is the proposed impervious within the landward 50-foot RPA. That includes portions of the proposed retaining wall and the proposed raised patio and fire pit. In orange, above the 50-foot RPA, you can see the areas of the proposed retaining wall within the seaward 50-foot RPA. Due to the placement of the proposed retaining wall and the replacement of the deck, these impacts within the RPA are a decrease of impervious area by 20 square feet in the seaward 50-foot RPA, but an increase of impervious area by 128 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA for a net increase of 108 square feet. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 4 shrubs. The applicant has proposed to plant 9 shrubs, therefore satisfying the mitigation requirements. Here is site photography starting on the side of the home. You can see the existing stone wall. Looking back across the backyard, you can see the slope, the state of the slope as it currently stands, and again, that stone wall going across the entirety of the backyard. Secondary angle and final angle. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a retaining wall and patio. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a retaining wall and patio is considered accessory in nature and because the structure is proposed closer to the resource than the original placement. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The applicant must submit a mitigation plan equating to 9 shrubs to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. The applicant must submit a surety of $500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by March 8th, 2024, and written requests for an extension to the exception must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than January 25th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Any questions for staff?
Looking at the drawing there where you have the stone, where is the actual wall going? I didn't see it laid out where the wall is, the retaining wall is going. Is it going to replace the stone that's there?
It's not following the exact same path. Let me see if I can.
It's going to be down from where the existing stone is?
It's, it changes shape a little bit from the existing stone. Here in a mix of green and blue, you can see the existing stone wall. And then when we flash forward, here is the proposed retaining wall. So slightly different shape.
Kind of nice to see when you show it like that, if you had some flags where it goes, kind of make it a little clearer for us to understand. Is it filled behind this wall? How high is the wall?
The wall is under 3 feet tall.
3, and it'd be filled in with material?
I believe so, but I'll let the contractor or the engineer clarify.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will open the public hearing with the applicant or his agent. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, members of the board. Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 205 Bullifonts Boulevard, Suite E in Williamsburg, Virginia. Matt, who originally submitted it, had a planned vacation, so since we did the plot plan, he asked me to come over and help talk through some of it. The main goal of the project is to replace the retaining wall that's there. The exact shape, as you just discussed, Mr. Waltrip, is not the same. It's being brought in on the right side, and then on the left, the reason it's being bowed around is because the poplar that's there is remaining. So we're trying to save that tree by bowing the wall around that. The retaining wall will be 3 feet tall. It will be filled behind it, but there's no plan for it to be grass or anything. So the low side of the wall is going to be allowed to just go right back to natural, and then the high side is just going to be mulch with plantings. The applicant has no interest in, grass or trying to add any chemicals or anything like that to the site. The overall, as staff mentioned, it's a very small increase. We did our best to try. There's a couple areas of existing impervious that we're actually removing. We did our best to try and make that number as close to balance as possible, but with the slight bow out, we weren't exactly able to make that a perfect trade-off. But overall, the goal of the project is, there's been some signs of erosion. I don't know if any of you were able to go out there, but the little stone wall that's there at the moment is not very much, not retaining anything. The end of the driveway has a decent number of cracks with a lot of dirt that, through rain is trying to go off. So the applicant is trying to be proactive with getting a retaining wall replaced, a small height retaining wall to, save their backyard and just make a nice little area. Happy to answer any questions you have, as well as the shoe markers are here as well.
Is this just an articulated block wall?
Yeah, it's just going to be a block wall across the back. Yep. And as staff said already, it'll be below 3 feet.
So you're not putting a footer in or anything, it's just going to be...
It's going to be a simple stone footer
Yeah.
with the block wall on top of it, so it should be pretty easy, it's a decent slope back there, but should be pretty easy to install, and then let that area on the low side just go back to being natural, and not no
I
interest in
assume
mowing
some
it.
gravel backfill behind it to help with
Yep, gravel
drainage.
backflow with a under drain to let the water go through the wall and.
A little bit of a BMP action with the wall.
Yeah, with the filtrate, with the water going through any of the surface water, will go there, especially with it just being mulch, that'll help it slow down, work its way in through the ground, and to your point, yes, act as a BMP going through that gravel and then slowly coming out, on the surface.
Where does the underwall drainage come out at? How many locations?
That hasn't been exactly designed yet. I would say it's most likely going to end up being, 4 or 5 spots, some of the low points, but nothing too crazy. I think it would be, in this particular instance, it would be beneficial to have a handful of those just so there's not one concentrated area where we have water going down the steep slope. So we can add that in there for the contractor doing the work to make sure that they have some to not have 1 or 2 just concentrated flow down that steep slope.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Would anybody else care to speak on this matter? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. The matter is before the board for discussion.
This seems to be a reasonable plan with minimal impacts to the RPA. I would be in support of this.
He addressed the runoff and the stone and the ditch, the pipes underneath to drain out in different locations, which that's a good idea, spreading it out.
Any other comments? Do I have a motion?
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board Case CBPA 23-0005 at 247 William Parksdale.
We have a motion to adopt the resolution. Mr. Wilson.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. May,
Yes.
Ms. Bowie,
Yes.
Mr. Roadley.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next item on our agenda is CBPA-23-0008 at 108 Oxford Circle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Jim City County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA-23-0008. Mr. Keith Taylor has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a deck located at 108 Oxford Circle within the Druid Hills subdivision. You can see this parcel outlined here in light blue above. This parcel was platted in 1964 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. The RPA affected this property in 2004 when the ordinance changed. As I said before, this property does fall within the Mill Creek watershed, which is outlined here in purple. The total lot size of this property is 0.74 acres, of which 68% is located within the RPA. As you can see above, there is a close-up of the aerial of this property, with the house existing probably just shy of halfway back into the lot. The topography on the lot slopes downwards or west towards a ravine that runs towards the dividing property line between this section of the cul-de-sac and an adjacent cul-de-sac. There is some JCSA water lines that run through here as well, and the RPA that affects this property. Again, the resource protection area is stemming from a perennial stream that is flowing in between these property lines and thus affecting this property. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 336 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA. There is an existing patio adjacent to the proposed deck, which is shown on the site plan above. It's outlined here in black, and the proposed deck is here in yellow. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 1 planting unit, which is 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. As stated before, on the site plan above, the proposed structure is outlined here in yellow, and the two sections of RPA are outlined in red. The 50-foot resource protection area is the one furthest away from the structure and the house that exists on the property, and the 100-foot resource protection area abuts up to the proposed structure and cuts through a portion of this house. Some site photographs. You can see the brick patio that is existing adjacent to the area that the applicant is proposing this deck. Looking back towards the house, staff has evaluated the application and exception requests for the construction of a deck. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a deck is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions, which are listed on the board above. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels. That reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. That all other necessary federal, state, and local permits are required as needed for this project. The applicant must place 3 inches of gravel underneath the deck. The applicant must submit a mitigation plan equating to 1 planting unit. That a surety of $500 must be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. That this exception request approval will become null and void if construction is not begun by March 8th, 2024, and that written requests for an extension be submitted no later than January 25th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Questions for staff?
Is this a raised deck or a ground level brick patio?
It is a raised deck to an extent. You could see there is some sloping topography in this photo here. So in some areas it will be higher than others off the ground.
Okay, because your site plan says brick patio, so that's just a mislabel.
I think it's actually, I think that actual call out is pointing to.
Pointing to the existing one, okay.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Do you know if they're putting gravel or any erosion retardant underneath the structure?
I haven't heard thus far, though it will be a condition of this permit, so it would be a requirement for them.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, I will open the public hearing. Would the applicant or their agent care to address the board? Seeing none, would anyone else care to address the board on this matter? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Discussion amongst the board?
I think they're very limited on where you can put this deck on the back of the house, and I think they have it situated in really the only place, because there's a HVAC system and a fuel tank on the other side that's actually outside the RPA, so I really think they're very limited on where they can put it, and I think it's a reasonable sized deck, in my opinion.
Any other comments or observations? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
Make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant the exception request for the Chesapeake Bay case number CBP 23-008 at 108 Oxford Circle.
We have a motion to grant the request. Mr. Wilson.
Motion to approve. Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA-23-0009 at 109 Mercar.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner, presenting CBPA 23-0009. Mr. Chase Grogg with Landtech Resources has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Gino Godwin and Ms. Judith Alicia for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a single-family dwelling, deck, and retaining wall located at 109 Mercar within the Ford's Colony subdivision and the Powhatan Creek watershed. Up above, you can see the subject parcel outlined in blue and the Powhatan Creek watershed shown here in purple. This parcel was platted in 2000 prior to the changes in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 2004. Here's aerial photography of the property, existing conditions. It is currently a wooded lot with wetlands on the back portion of the property. There is also a timber wall BMP on the very back corner of the property that we'll show later in the site plan. The total lot size of this property is 0.46 acres. Here's topography at the site, sloping downwards towards those wetlands in the back region of the property. The resource protection area, 100% of this lot is within the RPA, and the floodplain as it affects this property. The applicants are proposing to construct a new single-family dwelling, deck, and retaining wall. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 1,754 square feet in the landward 50-foot RPA and 2,528 square feet of impacts in the seaward 50-foot RPA, for a total of 4,282 square feet of impacts. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 11 planting units, which is 11 canopy trees, 22 understory trees, and 33 shrubs. The applicants have already provided a mitigation plan that satisfies this mitigation requirement. Staff is also requesting that an affidavit be recorded in the Williamsburg, James City County Courthouse because of the environmental sensitivity of this lot. On the screen, you'll see their proposed site plan, starting with the center line of the stream in the back portion of the lot, and the edge of wetlands shown here in green. The 50 and 100-foot resource protection areas shown in red. The area in orange is the portions of the home and driveway that are within the seaward 50-foot RPA. The yellow is the area of the home and driveway within the landward 50-foot RPA, as well as the proposed retaining wall, which is within the landward 50-foot. The limits of clearing shown by this black squiggly line. The building setback is the dotted blue line. The areas highlighted in green are all the areas of proposed mitigation. The timber wall BMP I mentioned earlier is all the way back here, shown in lilac. And then site photography, standing in the street and looking towards this lot, walking down the drainage easement on the side of the property, looking towards the timber wall BMP. The flagged wetlands at the back of the lot. Again, the wetlands on this property. Looking back up towards where the house is to be constructed on this property. And again, looking back up towards the street just from the other side of the property. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a single-family dwelling, deck, and retaining wall. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a single-family dwelling extends into the seaward 50-foot RPA, and the construction of a retaining wall is considered accessory in nature. On the screen, staff has provided an excerpt from Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Ordinance, just to reiterate that as this lot was platted in 2000, it was affected by the 2004 changes to the ordinance. Following through this list of reasoning, this has to be heard before the board because the encroachment extends into the seaward 50-foot RPA buffer. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied to other property owners in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and reasonable conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with this proposal to be major for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. An affidavit must be recorded in the Williamsburg, James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of a building permit. The applicants must submit a surety of $5,500 in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings of 11 planting units. This exception request approval will become null and void if construction has not begun by March 8, 2024, and written requests for an extension must be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than January 25th, 2024, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Questions for staff?
You mentioned there was over 4,000 square feet of impact.
Yes, sir.
How much of that is the house?
I don't have that number broken apart, but perhaps the Chase Grog could answer that for you.
Any other questions for staff? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will open the public hearing with the applicant or their agent. Chase?
Good evening, members of the board again. Chase Grog, Land Tech Resources, 205 Bullifonts Boulevard, Suite E, Williamsburg, Virginia, 23188. So to answer your question real quick, Mr. O'Brien, the house footprint is a 2,000 square foot house, which in this section of Ford's Colony, the minimum square footage for a first floor home is 2,000 square feet. The deck on the back, I just had that number, sorry, is 204 square feet. I don't have the front porch offhand, but the home itself is right in line with the minimum that we could do within this section of Ford's Colony. That the house is, to start with, I wanted to talk about the house location. So obviously we do our best to try and push these homes as close to the front setback as possible. In trying to also have a garage, the issue would have resulted in the home itself actually having to be further back in trying to add for a pad, and or if we did a courtyard loading, that front section of a garage in front of the home would have pushed the main body of the home to the back, which is why we decided to go with a driveway down the side into a garage that was then encompassed underneath that 2,000 square feet that the home already has, to allow for not a bigger increase with a courtyard or front loading garage. As staff pointed out, all of this water goes into the creek into the back and then right into a BMP that's right onto the lot next door. So there's a short path into the Timberwall BMP prior to getting into the more expansive wetland area. We looked at doing infiltration, but the concern here was with the wetlands being as far up as they were, digging a hole 2 or 3 feet down, that water could become an issue. The soil on site is a sea soil, which is not exactly ideal for infiltration. So we went with, trying to plan as much of the mitigation on site as we possibly could to help mitigate that impact. I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have. The applicant is here as well. I'll say for them, apologies for their delay. They left work and got to their car and the tire was flat, so made it just in the nick of time.
Like perfect timing.
Any questions for Mr. Grog? I have one. You mentioned that infiltration was impractical due to the soil conditions. Did you consider an engineered alternative that might help satisfy some of our concerns for not just sedimentation during construction, but the longer term sedimentation that does occur over time?
Yeah, so the issue with the engineered systems is they're actually deeper than some of the gravel ones that we even do. So the engineered systems, by the time you get down to the drain pipe, you're about 2.5 feet to 3 feet in the ground. So then extending a pipe, we would have most likely ended up into the wetlands to be able to daylight that pipe. So trying to do a beefier, again, was why we tried to put as much mitigation behind as possible, due to, unfortunately, a lot of those systems end up being deeper to meet the criteria as part of those specs from DEQ.
Runoff on the sides of the adjacent property owners causing a problem.
Both of the lots at the moment are actually vacant. But yes, per the county requirements as well as Ford's Colony requirements, both of our drainage is there's a high point in the front yard that's being directed on the left within our yard and being routed kind of behind the home into that patch of woods prior to the wetlands. And then the drainage on the right goes to the right of the driveway and off into those woods prior to getting to the wetlands as well. So there is some sheet flow that could potentially infiltrate, prior to getting into the wetlands. And again, with a lot of this being mulch with mitigation, I think that will help benefit to slow down the surface water runoff versus, in kind of that offset with not being able to do an on-site engineered system.
I've got 2 questions and maybe you can answer them. The elevation of the BMP pond behind, distance from the back of the property to that pond, how far?
I don't remember that max ponding elevation, but we're not within its 100-year storm elevation nor in the flood zone elevation. I don't know if you maybe remember from last month, Mr. Wilson, what that number was,
Yeah,
but I know
right.
we're above it.
Plenty of elevation to get to it.
Yes.
Where is it exactly? The
BMP is straight underneath the word center line of stream. So that timber continues straight on that plane. I don't know if you remember last month's case, which was the lot to the right there. It's that wall that continues.
Any other questions for Mr. Grog?
Thank you.
Would anybody else care to address the board? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing, and the matter is before the board.
Another Ford's Colony difficult lot. But they're putting the maximum, the minimum allowable house size on there. Appreciate the explanation around locating the house to minimize the impacts and take advantage of the BMP filtration.
I agree with Mr. O'Brien. I think too, the fact that the home is close to the front and the building setback is possible, and they're utilizing that basement space for a garage to minimize that footprint as well. I think it seems like this is a pretty reasonable plan here.
Any other discussion? I, I can appreciate that the house size is the minimum necessary to achieve the square footage required. This is still a lot of encroachment in the seaward 50 feet. I recognize that there is a BMP downstream and the soils on site are not conducive for on-site BMPs, and I recognize Mr. Grogg's testimony that a manufactured BMP or a manufactured soil would require an underdrain, which would have to daylight at some point. Just some observations, in trying to both provide the minimum necessary encroachment and also balance that with keeping it within the spirit of the Chesapeake Bay Act. It can be challenging at times, and this is one of those times. If there are no other comments or questions, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-23-0009109 Merker.
Have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception request. Mr. Wilson.
Motion is to adopt. Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Roadley?
No.
Motion passes.
Next item on the agenda is CBPA-22-0150 at 112 Discovery Lane. And as I recall, there was a public hearing opened last month, and it is still open.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, James City County Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA-22-0150. Miss April Warren has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction and approval of a walkway surrounding a raised garden bed, a greenhouse, a deck, pergola structure, and 2 sheds located at 112 Discovery Lane within the Powhatan Shore subdivision and the Powhatan Creek watershed. This parcel is platted here is outlined here in blue, and the purple line here shows the Powhatan Creek watershed divide. The actual Powhatan Creek being shown kind of snaking through this general region here. The Powhatan Shore subdivision is located on a series of canals, which then, for lack of a better word, outfall into Powhatan Creek. This parcel was platted in 1975 prior to the enactment of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. You can see the 2017 aerial photograph of this parcel here. Again, this parcel is outlined in light blue. The canal that I was speaking of earlier can be seen just behind this property. The 2021 aerial photograph is now shown above as well. And the total lot size of this property is 0.41 acres, of which 59% is located within the RPA. The topography is a gentle slope from the front of the property back towards the bulkhead that exists, dividing the canal from the actual property itself. And the floodplain, as it affects this property, it is affected by the Zone AE floodplain, which base flood elevation has been determined at 7 feet. The RPA is shown on the screen above. Again, as I said before, RPA encompasses 59% of this property. Existing conditions of the property as of the 2017 aerial, which was shown before, include a single-family dwelling, a driveway, a level yard leading to a timber bulkhead adjacent to the canal, and a dock structure out in the water. This property appeared before the Chesapeake Bay Board on October 12, 2022 for the after-the-fact approval of gravel and decking surrounding a raised garden beds, a greenhouse, 3 sheds, and a pergola structure. The exception request, CBPA 22-0126, was denied during this meeting. Staff has since worked with the property owner to modify the proposed site plan to reduce impacts. The newly proposed site plan is shown above, with the existing bulkhead being the very top of the screen. The seaward 50-foot RPA line being shown here in red, and the existing house down here towards the bottom of the screen. Just to orient us all, the canal, it would be up top, off screen, and the house is at the very bottom. Included in this after-the-fact proposal are gravel walkways, which are outlined here. They run in between the existing raised garden beds and come up along the side of this structure on the left-hand side of the screen. A greenhouse, which is shown here. Wooden work area that exists outside of the greenhouse and just landward of the gravel. And then these were the sheds that were included in this proposal. A pergola structure, of which the impervious nature conducted for the purpose of this exception request is the pavers that exist below the pergola. The pergola itself is not being considered tonight, just the pavers below, and a deck. So, the applicant is proposing to gain after-the-fact approval of for the construction of gravel and/or wooden deck paths equating to approximately 744 square feet of impacts within the seaward 50-foot RPA. A work area equating to approximately 94 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. A greenhouse equating to approximately 120 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. A garden shed equating to approximately 24 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA and 42 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. And a pergola structure equating to approximately 165 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. In the process of evaluating the application, staff also found that there is an existing shed on the property that is not visible in any of the aerial photography prior to 2017, equating to approximately 216 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. This shed is shown here on the site plan, just adjacent to the decks. Staff doesn't have any record of written request for an exceptional request or a Chesapeake Bay preservation waiver for any of the previously mentioned structures. Since the denial of CBPA 22-0126, the applicant has proposed to remove 72 square feet of impacts from the gravel area surrounding the raised garden beds, 40 square feet of glass framing from the cold frame, which was originally proposed, and 20 square feet from the gravel around the greenhouse. Total impacts associated with the after-the-fact structures equate to 423 square feet of impervious impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 982 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA for a sum of 1,405 square feet of impacts. Total reductions of after-the-fact approvals from the first exception request equate to 137 square feet of reductions of after-the-fact requests. On your screen above, you will see some areas in blue. These are changes from the original the original application that was denied in October. Looking at the original application, which is shown on the board above, these areas can be found here. This area of gravel, which was a potted or gravel path that had pots on top of it. The cold frame, this section of gravel, which was adjacent to the greenhouse, and this section of gravel that was adjacent to the greenhouse. This proposed shed has been eliminated from this exception request, and this portion of the deck that is also proposed has been eliminated. The shed, which was proposed and shown here, was originally 160 square feet, and the deck was modified from a 384 square foot deck to a 252 square foot deck. Additionally, in the site plan shown previously, you will see an area in red of which is existing patio that is being given credit for, or at least is not adding to the impervious nature or total. There is a 100 that exists, or that equates to 120 square feet, which is being removed from the 252 square foot deck proposed, equating to 132 square feet of new impervious impacts associated with this exception request as a whole. So all areas in orange are after the fact exception requests that exist in the field today. The new impervious stemming from the deck that is being proposed is shown here in yellow. Total reductions for the newly proposed items equate to 316 square feet of impacts. Therefore, a total of 453 square feet of reductions are associated with this proposal in relation to the previously denied exception request. Again, these are the areas of which modifications have been made to this originally proposed site plan. Just to put a side-by-side comparison up for you guys, this is the cold frame and gravel in the region just adjacent to the greenhouse that has been modified. Again, it's these two square angles of gravel and then the cold frame. This path of gravel, this proposed shed, and this portion of the deck in blue. I have provided a spreadsheet here with both summary of impacts associated with the first proposal, which is the top section, and then a summary of impacts associated with this new proposal. There are totals associated here and also mitigation units as they equate. Cells that are shaded here in yellow in both impact totals are landward 50-foot RPA totals, and cells that are highlighted in orange are the seaward 50-foot RPA totals. So just to run through things one more time, with this new proposed exception request, there are 744 square feet of gravel and or wooded area associated with the exception request. The cold frame has been eliminated. There is 120 square feet in the seaward 50-foot RPA for the greenhouse that is after the fact. There is a 24 square feet of impacts associated with the first shed in the seaward 50-foot RPA and 42 square feet of impacts in the landward 50-foot RPA. The pergola structure equates to 165 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. There is 94 square feet of impacts associated with the wooden work area just outside of the greenhouse. for a total of 423 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 982 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. Again, this total comes out to 1,405 square feet of impacts to the, just as a whole, excuse me. Because portions of this, it would be these portions in particular, are being heard after the fact, normal mitigation amounts equating to 3.5 planting units have been doubled, equating to 7 planting units, which is highlighted here in green. Impacts associated with the new proposal. The third shed, which was located in between both of the after-the-fact sheds, has been eliminated from this proposal. The deck is now being proposed has been minimized to 132 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. Therefore, total impacts associated with the newly proposed structures equates to 132 square feet. This equates to a half planting unit, in this case, 3 shrubs. Therefore, total mitigation amounts required associated with this exception request as a whole would be 7.5 planting units, or 7 canopy trees, 14 understory trees, and 24 shrubs. The applicant is intending to divert stormwater runoff from both the after-the-fact shed and greenhouse through a gutter system and into a rain barrel for future use. Staff is also requesting that an affidavit be recorded in the Williamsburg James City County Courthouse due to the environmentally sensitive nature of this lot. Because the entirety of the improvements are within the regulated floodplain, all improvements proposed and after the fact located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 of the floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits or be removed. Some site photographs. I believe many of you were able to make it out to the site for a visit. We are looking towards the pergola structure and now back towards what I'm going to refer to as the first after-the-fact shed. Over towards the area that's intended to be removed, the gravel, and you can see a little bit of the wooden work area. Towards the newly proposed deck that is being proposed and the existing slab that can be found in this area. Towards the greenhouse that is located here, just behind the greenhouse, you begin to see the raised garden structures that the gravel surrounds. In front of this greenhouse area, you can see the wooden work area that is was in the middle of being constructed. Just prior to the greenhouse, you can see the area which was originally proposed as a cold frame and is now just proposed to be a garden. This is the second shed that was being heard after the fact. Kind of back towards the gravel that snakes through these various rows of gardens. Standing on the other side of the property, looking at that section of this exception request as a whole. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the after-the-fact approval of a walkway surrounding a raised garden bed, a greenhouse, a deck, pergola, and 2 sheds. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because all of the structures are considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the proposed development. Should the board wish to approve this exception request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and federal permits as required. That a mitigation plan equating to 7 canopy trees, 14 understory trees, and 24 shrubs be submitted. That a surety of $4,000 to guarantee the submittal, to guarantee the mitigation plantings be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. That all development activities located in the special flood hazard area must comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approvals and permits. That an affidavit be recorded in the Williamsburg James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of a building permit. That the exception request approval will become null and void if construction of the proposed improvements has not begun by March 8th, 2024, and that written requests for extension be submitted no later than January 25th, 2024. I do have some supplemental documents that I would like to read into the record at the time that the public comment is opened after anybody else would like to speak. But until then, does anybody have any questions? And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Any questions for Mr. Long?
I just have one quick one. For the after the fact new proposal, one of the sheds is being eliminated, right?
Not an after the fact one, but the
I mean,
newly
but
proposed.
in the new proposal.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That is
so
correct.
That land would be just available. Nothing's going to be put on there.
Correct. And that is.
That blue one there.
Yep, the blue one up here on the site plan shown in the corner. We're kind of looking at the after the fact shed and the garden structure. The shed which was removed is to the left of this photo.
I think you did a pretty good job explaining all of this.
Thank you, sir.
I concur.
Thank you, Mr. Long. The public hearing is open, so we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening, board members and chairman. My name is April Warren. My residence is 112 Discovery Lane, Williamsburg, Virginia. I come before the board respectfully requesting you approve my request for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer. As noted during the initial board meeting, neither I nor my husband had any knowledge that the garden and other structures we built in our backyard may be in violation of the Chesapeake Bay Conservation Act, or that there be any building or other types of restrictions that apply to anything we are doing on the property. 5.5 years ago, before I had the first shed built, I called James City County Building Safety and Permit Department to determine where and what I could build on this property. I informed them that I needed to know what the setback requirements and any other restrictions/requirements were for my property. The following information was provided to me by James City County building official over the phone, and the information provided applies to each subsequent contact that followed as well. No permit is required for an open, unenclosed structure to include open garden structures, arbors, pergolas, etc. The pergola on our property complies with this requirement. No permit was required for enclosed structures, sheds, greenhouses under 256 square feet. Every enclosed structure on our property complied with that requirement. If a structure is further than 10 feet from the house, enclosed sheds/structures have a 5-foot setback from the side and rear property lines. If an enclosed structure is less than 10 feet from the house, setback is 35 feet from the rear property line and 15 feet to the side property line. Every enclosed structure on our property complied with these setback requirements. No permit is needed for decks at ground level, under 30 inches. No setback for decks at ground or grade/ground level. Decks attached to a home must follow setback requirements outlined above for enclosed structures less than 10 feet from the home. The proposed deck will comply with this regulation. No permit is needed for fences, walkways, paths, etc., and there is no setback requirement on these things. You can build any of these things right up to the property line. So this is what I was told when I contacted the county. I was never informed that garden beds, ground level or raised, required any type of permits or had any type of requirement at all. I was never informed or directed by any government official to contact any other government department or agency regarding these issues. 23 months ago, my husband made a similar call to the James City County Building Safety and Permit Department to confirm what I was told previously before continuing construction. He also did so to make sure no requirements had changed and that the information I had received in my previous inquiry was correct and current. He spoke to a county building official and gave them our address. He was informed of the exact same requirements I was informed of as I outlined above. He also asked if there was anything else necessary or that he should know before beginning construction and was informed that there was not. Again, no mention was made during the conversation of any other requirements for any type of garden, etc., with the exception that my husband was directed to and then contacted the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality for information on building our garden near the canal. He spoke with an official who directed him to the following information, which came directly from the department's website. That information stated the following: what types of things can I do in the RPA? As a homeowner living in or near an RPA, you can help protect local streams in Chesapeake Bay by preserving this valuable stream buffer. Many homeowner activities are allowed in the RPA, such as gardening. Typical gardening activities are allowed unless you are digging and exposing the soil of an area greater than 50 by 50 feet or 2,500 square feet, or removing mature trees with a diameter of 3 inches or greater. Our garden is far less than 2,500 square feet to include the gravel paths, walkways, and no trees were removed anywhere for that construction, so we were in compliance. I can assure you we did our due diligence in contacting James City County, and the county failed to inform us with the proper information concerning building on our property in an RPA. Also, if I had been provided the correct information, what would I have to gain by not obtaining the proper permits before starting the construction in my backyard and risk having to come before the board after the fact? Who in their right mind would want to go through the aggravation I have gone through after the fact to include diverting valuable time to handling this issue, having meetings, etc., the extra cost involved, the stress, the money we have spent on the construction to date, and the possibility of having to perhaps remove it all after the fact, or if approved, be fined with double mitigation, in addition to having to pay a surety of $4,000 to guarantee mitigation plantings. Believe me, if I had known all of this prior, we would have followed the proper protocol. The lack of permitting, which is being considered after the fact, seems to be the main issue. And as initially stated, we did our due diligence in contacting the county before constructing anything on the property and was given specific information regarding setbacks, building structures / sizes requiring permits, all of which we were under the size requiring permits, etc. At no time were we informed that permitting was still required due to location of house on a canal. If we had known that, we would have obtained the proper permits first. In May of last year, we had an unexpected visit from a James City County building official / inspector. He inquired as to what we were constructing, which I told him, and I also mentioned I had been in contact with James City County prior to any construction, and we were following all the guidelines provided, and we were told that we did not need a permit for anything we had done or were doing on the property, which he could also clearly see. He then stated that it is their job to respond to inquiries or complaints made to James City County, and that was the reason for the visit. He did not say that we had to halt what we were doing or that there were any violations. If anything was wrong, he clearly had an official duty to inform me of these things at that time. At the very least, the James City County Building Safety and Permit Department had an important duty to inform me of any violations in a timely manner after this visit. The first inspector could clearly see the property backed up to the canal, yet he said nothing. Then on June 24th, Trevor Long and Robin Benedict, who have been very kind, came to my residence stating why they were there and asked if they could see what was being constructed in the backyard. I took them into the yard and told them everything I noted previously. At that time, I was informed by Trevor as to issues from the Stormwater and Resource Protection Department and the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act due to the property being in the floodplain, and this would have to go under review. I asked if we had to halt what we were doing, and he said yes, so we complied and have done nothing since that date. I subsequently met with Michael Wilson, Section Chief Resource Protection, on August 22nd at his office. He as well has been very kind and accommodating. During our meeting, I informed him that my husband and I both did our due diligence regarding contacting county offices to ensure we were following county guidelines and ensuring nothing we were doing required permits, waivers, or prior approvals. We moved forward based on the information that we were given when we first called the county. Not knowing that we were misinformed by the county officials is obviously not our fault. During this meeting with Michael Wilson, he asked the time frame when we contacted the county, and I told him the approximate time frames as to when we would have called the county. He then informed me that he didn't doubt that I was provided with inaccurate or improper information during those time frames because there were issues with turnover with employees and employees not knowing the regulations. Unfortunately, we are now being penalized for not being provided proper guidance by the county. During our conversation, I mentioned that in the 44 years this home has been in our family, previously owned by my parents, there has only been one major storm whereby water was forced from the canal onto the property beyond what would be normal during an extremely high tide during a normal storm. Since taking over ownership of the home, my major intent with the yard was to increase water absorption and certainly to ensure nothing is flowing back into the canal that should not. When we added the gardens on the property to include the annuals, perennial, and vegetable gardens, we purchased and put down a lot of additional soil to mainly increase water absorption on the property and enhance the ability of plants to grow and thrive. I noted during our discussion as well that anywhere we have decking or paths, gravel or pavers, we did not put down any sand or any other materials that would not allow drainage through the rocks or between the pavers or deck boards. With all the rain we have had recently, we have not had any issues with drainage or standing water in any of those so-called impervious areas. I have provided videos and pictures of the areas of construction in the backyard while it is raining to Trevor Long, so that he could present it to the board at this meeting. Natural materials were used in the construction of this garden to include lumber, gravel, and soil. The entire base layer of the garden is anchored to the ground by 2-foot painted and sealed rebar, and each successive layer is attached by 8 or 10-inch screws and 18-inch rebar. The garden is solid, stable, and leaches absolutely nothing into the canal. Even a catastrophic storm like Isabel in 2003 will do nothing to this garden except get it wet, and the raised beds will contain everything. My father owned this house during Isabel, so I know exactly what the water did on this property at that time, and that was a 100-year event. Isabel would have done nothing to this garden except get it wet, and nothing would have been put into the canal then or by a similar storm event now or in the future based on anything we have done. We have created no additional runoff into the waterway. In fact, we have diminished the runoff, and any soil erosion from this property considerably. We've diminished any runoff and any soil erosion from this property considerably by increasing the height of the bulkhead, sealing it between each layer of lumber, and then sealing the interior portions of the raised beds with a waterproof membrane. Furthermore, every board used in the construction of this garden was individually sealed with Thompson's water seal. Nothing will ever leak into the canal from the garden. We use no pesticides, fertilizers, or chemicals to produce what we are growing. It is 100% organic. We have constructed this garden to feed our family organic produce at a reasonable price. As you can clearly see, after numerous contacts with government agencies and officials, and my husband and I gathering all information we possibly could, contacting everyone we were directed to, we clearly did our due diligence, and nothing was ever said about contacting anyone at James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Department or about the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act and how it affected construction on this property. It was never my intent to violate any laws or avoid permits. No county or state government official ever directed us to contact your department, and they clearly had a duty and numerous opportunities to do so. This is clearly negligence on the part of county officials we spoke with, not ours. After all these calls and interactions with government building officials, we had a reasonable expectation that we had been informed accurately and thoroughly and could proceed with confidence. I am now being punished for being misinformed by county officials. We did our part and were let down by government officials who had an obligation to inform us accurately and thoroughly. Furthermore, everything we have done has enhanced this property for wildlife of all sorts. Insects, birds, hummingbirds, butterflies, bees, etc. love this yard and are abundantly present. There is no soil erosion taking place, and there will be none in the future. There are no nutrients, pesticides, or other hazardous chemicals flowing into the canal from our property. We have protected against and minimized pollution and deposition of sediment into the canal. There is no substantial detriment to water quality. Before starting any construction, my husband spoke with our two next door neighbors, to inform them of what we would be building in the backyard. And both stated they were fine with what we were going to do, and it was our backyard and we could do what we pleased. In addition, neighbors and other people coming into the neighborhood from elsewhere have told us how nice it all looks so far. People stop by in their boats, kayaks, canoes, paddle boards, on their bikes, walking by, and stop out front in their cars, talk with my husband or myself, and comment on how beautiful it looks and how impressed they are with my husband's carpentry skills. We personally have not received one negative comment, except obviously for the complaint or complaints that were made to the county that initiated this investigation, and the 2 letters that the board received prior to the first meeting, which I am assuming are from individuals that made the complaints. Obviously, this entire investigation stemmed from someone in this neighborhood contacting your office. After hearing the 2 letters that were read at the prior board meeting, obtaining copies of them from the James City County website from the minutes of the meeting, I took time to read and pray over these 2 letters and quickly realized who sent the letters based on the content of the letters and how these individuals no longer could look me or my husband in the eye and have since avoided any conversation with us. I am sure one letter came from the Boyers and the other from the Salmons, which on both accounts is very disappointing and unsettling. The Boyers live to the left of my residence as one faces my home, and my husband and I spoke with Frank on numerous occasions as to what he was planning on doing in the yard, and Frank continually told my husband he had no issue with what we were doing, that it was our yard and we could do whatever we wanted. Frank would even compliment Eric on his carpentry skills, workmanship, and the fact that he was out there from dawn to dusk working at his age, being 66 years old. When my husband built the frame for the upper side walls to the greenhouse, he did so in our driveway. Frank even helped my husband and my sons carry the walls to the backyard and hold them in place while my husband secured them. I even had a conversation with Frank myself, asking if he was okay with all we were doing, and his comment to me was he was fine with it, and although it was not what he would do in his yard, it was our yard and we could do what we wanted. His wife, when she found out we were planting a garden, told me how the family that used to own the house across the street from us had a huge garden, and when they would go away, they would always let her go and pick whatever she wanted out of their garden. Knowing she's a vegetarian, I gave the Boyers produce out of our garden throughout the summer. It's quite disappointing that a neighbor can tell you to your face that they are fine with what you're doing, watch my 66-year-old husband slave in the yard, constructing everything himself, compliment him on his carpentry skills, accept produce from our garden, and then file a complaint after the majority of the work is done, and after I have spent a great deal of money on supplies for the construction. I apologize for being upset. What's really sad is my father told me when I moved into the house and before he died to never trust Frank. But I am the type of person to not make judgments about someone until that person has done something to lose my trust. Unfortunately, I did not heed my father's advice and learned the hard way. The letter from the Salmons is extremely hurtful to me because they were friends with my parents. I have known them for over 30 years, and they attended my wedding 30 years ago. I had also been confiding in Wayne Salmon about what was going on with the county, and he ridiculed the county, told me that dealing with James City County is a nightmare, and he had to jump through hoops when it took him 8 months to get a permit to build his shed in his backyard. My husband asked Wayne if he had any issues with the construction of our backyard, and Wayne stated no, that it was our yard and we could do whatever we wanted. He even complimented Eric on his carpentry skills. Additionally, I was sharing produce from my garden with the Salmons as well, which they were happily accepting. As a matter of fact, whatever extra produce I had from my garden, I shared with other family members who didn't have gardens, shared with surrounding neighbors, and donated the excess to the House of Mercy in Williamsburg for those in need. Having lived in and or been associated with this neighborhood for over 40 years, there are other gardens right up to the bulkheads on the canals. There are many impervious concrete and aggregate walkways in backyards, gravel and rock areas of all sizes of material butting up to bulkheads, sheds and outbuildings much closer to the canal than anything we have done, and many ground level decks that are built at the end of properties that connect to the homeowner's docks. Some of the homes are so close to the canal that you can actually do a hop, skip, and a jump from the decks off the back of their homes and land in the canal. I mentioned all of this during one of my meetings with Stormwater Resource and Protection, and then stated that I doubt if everyone in this community went through the proper channels to do construction in their backyards. The response from Stormwater Resource Protection was that they are a complaint-driven organization, and unfortunately, they do not have the manpower to go through every neighborhood in James City County looking for violations. Once again, I find this to be an extremely difficult pill to swallow, because if I had not been the unfortunate one to live next to a neighbor who filed a complaint, nothing would have been done. I am sure there are many others in this neighborhood and other neighborhoods in James City County who are in violation, but because no complaint is filed, they are in the clear. How is that fair and equitable treatment? I also found out from Stormwater Resource Protection that Powhatan Shores and Chickahominy Haven are grandfathered neighborhoods because the neighborhoods' homes were built prior to the Chesapeake Bay Act going into effect. Furthermore, I asked if all surrounding neighbors are contacted when individuals go before the board to get permits for building in their backyards. I was informed that yes, that was the case, yet I know I was never contacted or asked if I approved when other neighbors did any building or landscaping in their yards, yet I would have been in the circle of neighbors to be contacted, and Stormwater Protection was able to confirm that during our meeting. There are numerous properties within sight of my property that are in clear violation of the same things I am now being held liable for or defending myself against in the matter pending. Selective enforcement based on my neighbor's opinion is illegal. If I am held liable, everyone in a similar situation in this neighborhood must be held accountable to the same standards. Furthermore, there is a property inside of my home that has hundreds of square feet of exposed aggregate concrete pool deck surrounding a concrete pool, in addition to a deck off the back of the home and a wooden deck at the end of the property which butts up to their dock, all within 50 feet of the same canal and waterway. This sets a clear and enforceable precedent in this matter. I've always had the mindset that a property owner has every right to do whatever they want in their own yards. It is not my right to tell another homeowner what they can or can't do in their yard. And honestly, I don't care what someone else does in their yard. When the prior owner of the home, when the prior owner of the home to the right of my house constructed his shed in his back side yard, he never consulted my father to ask him if he had an issue with it. He just built it and it obstructed my parents' view from the kitchen window. But my parents never said a word or complained. They also had the mindset, and so do I, that it's a man-made canal used for the sole purpose of getting out to the James River and up to the Chickahominy River. It's not an ocean or river with natural, beautiful views. It's just a canal. It's not my right to tell another homeowner I don't aesthetically like the looks of their yard, whether it be other structures they have built, landscaping they have done, choices of trees and plants which they have landscaped, the type of pool they may have added above ground or in ground, etc. It's not my yard, and everyone has the right to pursue happiness on their own properties the way they see fit, as long as it is not physically endangering a neighbor. Based on some research and speaking with a subject matter expert in the NFIP floodplain
Mrs.
spaces.
Warren, can you take a breath?
Yeah.
Can you wrap up your
Yeah, I only
dialogue?
have one
Thank you.
page basically left to read and a little bit on the next one. It appears as my main structure is in what is called a shaded X zone, or the 500-year floodplain, and the back of the property drops off into the AE7 elevation flood zone, the 7 being commensurate with the required minimum elevation to protect from the 100-year flood levels. Please note that the NFIP does not require any residential structure to meet elevations in the 500-year floodplain, only the 100-year, designated by the AE7. Also note that accessory structures such as gazebos, sheds, pergolas, etc., and landscaping do not need to meet elevation requirements as defined by the NFIP. The structures garden on my property will not obstruct flood flow, alter drainage, or create runoff that would degrade the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay. The greenhouse and garden tool shed will both have a gutter system and rain barrels to collect rainwater, which will be used to water the gardens and other plantings in our yard. The pergola is an open structure which allows rain and stormwater to flow straight down to the ground. The planting of the garden and raised garden beds have increased water absorption. The additions in no way constitute a substantial improvement due to the de minimis nature of landscaping and accessory structures, which do not impact the value of the main structure on the property, as it is not connected, nor is the main structure considered to be a flood zone that can be regulated under the NFIP. Searching both local ordinances and the NFIP regs, there is nothing related to requirements determining fill or the compaction of fill that could be found. Requirements of compacted fill in the 5-zone properties is highly regulated. However, my base property, or the V zone, I should say, is a 500-year zone, and the back half is an AE. If I'm not in a designated floodway or V zone, then fill requirements don't apply to me under the NFIP. From the map I pulled, I am in a shaded X 500-year and an AE7 100-year floodplains, neither of which has incredibly restrictive requirements associated with regulatory floodways, nor V coastal requirements. I also believe our accessory structures are compliant with floodplain management codes and ordinances, completely open in regard to the pergola, and either elevated or wet flood-proofed, anchored and made of flood-resistant materials that are required with structures such as sheds in the greenhouse. Therefore, all development or redevelopment activities, impervious cover after the fact and newly proposed, totals the 1527 square feet that he mentioned. We have not intentionally or knowingly violated the Chesapeake Bay Conservation Act or floodplain building restrictions. We had no knowledge, nor were we informed of such restrictions in the numerous contacts we had with James City County building officials, or when my husband contacted the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. We made every attempt to gather the necessary pertinent information and follow the letter of the law as explained to us by government officials. Based on the staff report Trevor gave me, I am respectfully requesting the board perhaps reconsider the mitigation amounts outlined. As stated in the document, the mitigation amounts have been doubled due to this exception request being heard after the fact. I will do whatever mitigation is necessary and required by the board, but I do feel it's a little unfair that I'm being penalized with double mitigation when we contacted the county before the first shed was built, and again before we started any other construction in the backyard. And the county failed to provide us with proper information or direct us to their office. We certainly would not have proceeded with construction prior to getting proper approvals if we had known otherwise. The county should bear some of the responsibility for not informing me correctly. Obviously, I want to settle this matter amicably and remedy this issue in a fashion that is acceptable and fair to all parties concerned, given the circumstances of this particular case and the fact that the majority of the work is completed. I never intentionally violated any ordinance, acts, or laws. I followed every guideline I was given by every government official my husband and I contacted. I hope and pray that you will consider all the above and will approve my request for a Chesapeake Bay exception and allow me to continue working towards completing this project, which is 75% done. And I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions for me?
Questions for Mrs. Warren?
And I'm sorry to put you through that. I just wanted to be thorough.
No, I understand.
And so a question about your greenhouse. Is that, I see the infrastructure, it's shown up here.
Right.
That's the current status of it.
That's the current status of it, yes.
So it's got the infrastructure in place.
Correct.
Ready to add the
Basically, the only thing that has to be done is to put in the clear panels.
And how
and
is that
the door.
secured to the ground?
I'm sorry?
How is that secured to the ground?
The the same way the garden was done. I mean, my husband did all of it, and with him not being here, I can't speak to that well. I know my husband being a contractor in his previous life, he would make sure that that structure is not going anywhere, and would have secured it properly so that it's not going to move laterally, it's not going to come off its footings, nothing.
The reason I asked that question is right now that greenhouse is in the seaward side of the RPA, which is frankly, my biggest concern is what is going on in that particular section of the property. And if there was any way that this greenhouse could be moved to the other side of the 50-foot RPA, is that a possibility?
I don't know what would be involved with that because of how it's constructed. That is something I would have to ask my husband because I don't know if we would lose all the wood we've already got into the structure and the cost of it and have to start over. And I mean, to be quite frank with you, I have penny pinched for years to be able to do what we're doing in our backyard because I literally started over in 2017.
So you see up there on that upper right-hand corner where the blue shed was removed?
Yes.
Would that be a potential place for the greenhouse?
It may be, but I'm not sure. I think the reason why Eric put the greenhouse there was because of the fact it was in proximity to the entire garden. And it just made sense from a construction standpoint. And the one thing is, the property looks like a mess right now, but I can guarantee you once he is completed with this project, it will be absolutely beautiful. Anything he does to the best of his ability, and we have had people compliment him on other things he has built in his life, and he's built some big homes up in Northern Virginia, and he's won many awards, so he doesn't do things halfway. He's going to make sure that it looks good and proper and appealing to the neighborhood.
Any other
And I'm
questions?
sorry I
for
can't address that any better because I just don't know.
Mrs. Warren? Thank you very much for your appearance.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Does anybody else care to address the board?
Good evening, board members and chairman. My name is Bruce Plumley. I live on 115 Godspeed Lane in Williamsburg, Virginia. And my property is actually completely opposite all the structures you see here. I am not one of the people that made the official complaints or anything like that, but I'm the one that has to look at all these structures. The HOAs in the Powhatan Shores require in their rules that just one structure is allowed on the property, and it has to be in keeping with the house. In other words, it has to look like the house, so it doesn't look awful. And I just wanted to point out that I have to look at this from the other side of the canal, and it is not pretty. There are just far too many structures there, in my opinion. And I just wanted to voice my opinion tonight on that. As I said, I'm not one of the original complainers. This is just another one.
Thank you very much for
The board members.
your testimony. Would anybody else care to address the board? Mrs. Warren?
As far as to the comment that was just made regarding Powhatan Shores and the HOA, there are numerous properties within Powhatan Shores that have more than one structure on their property. There are numerous homes within Powhatan Shores that have structures on the property which do not mimic the look of the house. Now, obviously, our first shed that was built mimics our house because we put the same siding on it and the same roofing material. But obviously, a greenhouse isn't going to mimic the look of a house because that's not the purpose of it. The tool shed will more than likely look so that it blends in with the rest of the structures on the home.
Thank you. Are there any other comments for the public hearing? Hearing none, I will, whoop, one moment, Mr. Long.
Sorry, I do have a variety of public things to bring to the public comment. First is a series of letters that I would like to read to the board. And second are media that Ms. Warren provided and requested to show you all as well. These were letters written in place of people who could not attend tonight. Mr. Long, I am writing this letter regarding Miss April Warren's property at 112 Discovery Lane, Williamsburg. I was approached by April's husband, Eric, before starting the project of building a gazebo pergola in his backyard that was to be located near my property. He explained where it would be located and asked if I would be okay with this project, to which I replied that I was okay with it. As far as any runoff, I haven't witnessed any. The second later states, hello, it seems that there are two issues with the Warren project. One is aesthetics and the other is protection of water to the Chesapeake watershed. The first issue is the perceived beauty of the project or lack thereof. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I believe that when the project is completed, it will be appealing to the eye. The construction appears to be quality work. However, I realize the beauty of the project is not the purview of the Chesapeake Bay Board and as such not the responsibility of the board. The second issue is the purview of the board, which is the protection of the water that may enter into the watershed. The water that would be affected by this property is very small. As a homeowner across the canal from the Warren residence, I have witnessed no runoff of water into the canal during the construction of the project. The Warrens stated their garden is organic and will use no fertilizers or pesticides. Therefore, no fertilizers or pesticides will run off into the water and into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. In my opinion, their project does not violate any principles of the Chesapeake Bay watershed and should be allowed. The third letter states, I'm opposed to the approval of CBPA-22-0150 at 112 Discovery Lane because the size of the project does not fit into the Powhatan Shores neighborhood. The oversized project that is proposed is overwhelming to the Powhatan Shores neighborhood, the small lot size that it will be located on, and the water runoff into the water canals that it borders. The proposed project size is way too big for the small lot size at 112 Discovery Lane and the canal that it borders. I request that this proposed project be rejected again as it was already rejected the last time it appeared before the board. I would now like to show the media that was submitted. That's okay, Ms. Warren? All right, I will like to do so from here is fine. You all have seen this site plan, some photographs. I'm going to move to get to the video section of this. Just to clarify, I believe these videos were taken in the rain.
Mr. Long, you can leave the video run. One of the things that struck me when we did the site inspection was in what we're looking at right here, if the gravel were not included in this application, that was natural grass, would this matter be before the board?
That portion of this matter would not be before the board. Gravel is considered impervious from our standards. However, if it were a material such as mulch or grass, the gravel sections would not be heard before the board. The sections that would be heard before the board are the decking material and the actual structures themselves. One more item that I just wanted to bring up is that the garden itself, those structures, the raised garden beds, and the areas of strictly gardening are not being considered tonight. They are not part of the impervious total, nor are they considered after the fact in any way.
Thank you. I believe it is the intent, Mrs. Warren, you can clarify, but the intent is to show that you're not inducing runoff during a rain event.
April, up to the podium.
I'm sorry, I'm so
Oh, you're fine, you're fine.
The reason why I took the videos was to show that I don't really have any standing water in what's considered the impervious areas, where the rock is, where the wood structures are, where the pavers are, because of the fact that it goes straight down through the rocks to the ground and is absorbed there. And one of the things, I'll be quite frank, Trevor mentioned to me that if we took out all the rock and put in mulch, that they wouldn't consider that impervious. You know, obviously we could do that, but we spent a lot of money on rock and spent a lot of time putting it down. So to remove all of it would be a little bit of a chore and a waste of money. The other thing is the reason why we didn't put mulch down, because our thought was, well, if we put mulch down and we have high winds, you know, what likelihood do we have of that mulch flying into the canal? The rocks aren't going to go anywhere in high winds. They're not going to go anywhere in the flood because it's going to drain straight through the rocks, and then whatever typically would go back into the canal would do so.
Thank you very much.
It appears 2 will not play. Hopefully, this will be sufficient.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Long?
Not from me, no, thank you, though.
Public hearing is still open. Would anybody else care to comment on this case? Public hearing is now closed. The matter is before the board. I will make an opening comment. I was struck by the busyness of the site plan when we initially reviewed this, and that carries forward in the field when you do a site inspection. There's a lot going on. But I was struck with Mr. Long's comment with regard to how the gardens would be treated under review of the under the Ches Bay Act review. And I really, in my opinion, those gravel walkways, in part because they're contained, are acting like little individual cells. And so I tend to agree that they're not promoting runoff. Just an observation. I haven't gone out there to measure them. That's just anecdotal. But so for me, to Mr. O'Brien's comment, it's the location of the impervious surface shed, in my opinion, the shed and the greenhouse, perhaps the wooden work decks, if you will, and then you've got the impervious walkers for the pergola and associated with that structure, because I believe those were pavers, not gravel. And it's my understanding that the water coming off the greenhouse will be captured in rain barrels and then used for gardening purposes. So just make that observation. I had an opinion based upon my initial reaction, and that changed slightly following the site visit. Given that it is busy, I recognize that, but that in and of itself, aesthetics are not necessarily within the purview of the board. Further discussion.
Well, I appreciate Ms. Warren's attempts to reduce the impacts. However, at over 1,400 square feet, there's still significant impacts to the site, and the planting mitigation really is. I just don't see that there's room for it on that lot, and I continue to have the same concerns as I did last time, that if approved, the precedent that this would set would be concerning to me. That would be my comments.
It would be my recommendation that we consider in this instance, or my thought, perhaps not recommendation, my thought that we consider reducing the mitigation requirement to exclude the gravel paths which were incorporated originally. I just don't believe they are producing the sheet flow that the county is, assigns to gravel walkways. That's just a comment. That would have the effect, because of the 2-to-1 mitigation, of reducing it, I would think, rather substantially.
I'll make a couple of comments. First of all, I wasn't here for the last one when the proposal was reviewed and rejected, but I did review the minutes from that meeting. And then, having been here today, there's a lot shared about the after the fact, before the fact, whether it was intentional or non-intentional, James City County officials, et cetera. To me, that's not a factor, nor are the HOA rules around the property. Those are taken up. Those are not in our purview. they're something that can be taken up with the HOA, and they have the authority to deny or approve things. So I set those aside as well. What I'm mostly focused on is, two things. One is in the RPA is the minimum amount being done for the stated purpose, which is a garden. And then number two is what is the water quality detriment associated with the activity. And so if I just focus on those two things, because that's really, frankly, why I'm sitting up here, and my decision would be based upon those two pretty much exclusively. I kind of put another focus on the seaward side of the 50-foot RPA. That to me is the critical area. And so I was asking the question earlier about the greenhouse, because that is on the seaward side of the RPA. If that could be moved, that would really address two issues. One is it would move something out of that particular area so that you're doing just the minimum necessary to do the gardening. Plus, even though there's rain barrels associated with the greenhouse, there's still going to be some runoff, and moving that back to the landward sides, in my mind, would be desirable. And I concur with what's said here about the impervious gravel, which is about 3/4 of the impervious surface on the seaward side of the 50-foot RPA. And so in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's impervious, but is it really impervious? So I basically look back to, what can we do on the seaward side of the RPA in order to minimize the impact? And that's where the greenhouse comes into play for me. So I'm kind of stuck on moving the greenhouse as a condition for approving this, but I'd like to hear from others.
Well, I guess I'm it. Would you like to speak first, and then I'll be last?
If I could make a quick comment.
I'll be last. It's
Yes, sir.
fine.
All right, well,
Mr. Waltrip?
yes.
If I could make a quick comment on the potential moving of the greenhouse. Unfortunately, when a project is before the board, particular elements of the project, such as the location of items, what materials they are, is not a function of the conditions that we could put in it. That would have to be a new project before this board. Things that the board could change on the condition side of the house if it chose to approve the project would be things like the mitigation units and the amount of the surety, things like that. Thank you.
Mr. Waltrip?
So I'm interpreting that as saying that we have no ruling as far as saying as far as moving the greenhouse?
That's correct. It was the applicant's choice to put the greenhouse where it was on the project. You can give that an up or a down vote, but as a part of a condition of approval, you couldn't then move the greenhouse.
Yeah, and I'm aware of that. The reason I brought that up is that I understand that the applicant has to be the one to make that proposal. So I'm just planting that seed, if there's an interest in doing that. But I understand that we're doing an up and down vote on the proposal as is, with the possibility of considering some other changes that we have the authority to recommend.
That explains that. My take on it is that it's a lot going on down on that yard in that 50-foot area. And as far as using the stone versus the mulch, I've dealt with that many, many years. I think the stone does a better job because that mulch, if you get real heavy rains, it will float on you and it'll float out of there. So I think that with the stone in there, that would be the right way to go as far as my take on that part of it. I think that greenhouse, if it was my take on it, that and we had anything to say about it, that if it was moved, it would be to everybody's advantage for the Warren to consider that if that was something. But that's, as far as what we're voting on here now is the water runoff and everything. And I think that she's done a great job to rectify that situation there. I don't think that's something that we can challenge on that at all right at this point. So,
Any additional comments? The matter is before the board. We have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to deny the application for the exception request for Chesapeake Bay Board, case number CBPA-22-0150 at 112 Discovery Lane.
Motion to deny the application, the exception request. Mr. Wilson.
Motion is to deny. Mr. Waltrip?
no.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Bowie?
Yes.
Mr. Rodley?
No.
Motion passes 3-2.
Mr. Wilson, are there any board?
Go ahead. I apologize, Mr.
No,
Rodley.
that's all right. You can shush me anytime you want. Any board considerations?
No, sir.
Then I think we are adjourned. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
A move? We are adjourned.